There is a place in the Atlantic Ocean where ships and aeroplanes seem to disappear more often than anywhere else on Earth. It's an area that forms a triangle between Miami, Bermuda, and the ocean east of Puerto Rico. It's sometimes called the Devil's Triangle, but it's better known by another name. Over 100 planes and ships have been lost there since 1945, and over 1,000 people have disappeared, many without trace. Join us as we discuss the 5 most disturbing disappearances to have taken place in the Bermuda Triangle. When discussing the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle, there is no better place to begin than with the mysterious disappearance of Flight 19. It was shortly after 2 p.m. on the 5th of December 1945. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers departed US Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, Florida for a routine navigational training flight with Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor acting as the flight's leader. Taylor was a seasoned naval aviator with some 2,500 flying hours and multiple World War II combat tours in the Pacific. The group of aircraft, dubbed Flight 19, were to execute a routine bombing training exercise, then return home. The flight plan was to fly east from the Victoria coast, conduct bombing runs at a place called Hens and Chicken Shoals, turn north, then proceed over Grand Bahama Island. The flight's last leg was to fly back home to Fort Lauderdale. The weather was projected to be relatively normal, except for a few scattered showers. On the first leg of the flight, everything went as planned, as they dropped practice bombs without incident. But as the group began to turn north for the second leg of the journey, that is when the trouble began for Flight 19. At approximately 3:45 p.m, Fort Lauderdale's flight tower received a message from Taylor, who was reportedly sounding confused and worried.
Cannot see land. We seem to be off course.
There were a few moments of silence. The tower personnel peered out into the clear day in the direction of where the planes were supposed to be operating, but there was no sign of them.
We cannot be sure where we are. Repeat, cannot see land.
Contact was lost for the next 10 minutes. Then the tower received another transmission from Taylor's Avenger, but it wasn't from Taylor. It was from one of the crew.
We can't find west. Everything is wrong. We can't be sure of any direction. Everything looks strange. Even the ocean.
There was another delay, and then tower personnel learned from interceptor transmissions that the flight leader had turned over his command to another pilot for unknown reasons. After 20 minutes of radio silence, the new leader's voice transmitted to the tower, but it was trembling, bordering on hysteria.
We can't tell where we are. Everything is... Can't make out anything. We think we may be about 225 miles northeast of base.
For a few moments, the pilot rambled incoherently, before uttering the last words ever heard from Flight 19.
It looks like we're entering white water. We're completely lost.
Then, silence. Within minutes, tower personnel scrambled 2 PBM Mariners. They were headed for Flight 19's last known estimated position, and 10 minutes into the rescue flight, they checked in with the tower. But that was the last time one of the rescue planes transmitted back to Fort Lauderdale's flight operations. 6 aircraft had now disappeared, seemingly without trace, over the same stretch of water within hours of each other. At daybreak the following day, the US Navy launched an even larger rescue effort. It lasted around 5 days, during which 300,000 square miles were combed for any sign of the planes, but nothing was found. No aviators, wreckage, life raft, or even an oil slick. The official explanation was that Flight 19's flight leader had simply got lost and crashed into the sea when the planes ran out of fuel, and the Mariner rescue craft had exploded in mid-air, as the Mariner was prone to such accidents. But people remained unconvinced. The Navy knew the location of the rescue aircraft, so for them to find no trace of this, or Flight 19's, despite the extensive search, seemed to indicate there was something more going on than mere pilot or aircraft error. The disappearance of Flight 19, far from being a one-off, had brought worldwide attention to one of the most mysterious and dangerous places on Earth. And as time went by, its reputation for making aircraft and ships disappear would only grow. On the 27th of January 1948, Star Tiger left London Airport bound for Havana in Cuba. The captain for this flight was Brian McMillan, an experienced former RAF pilot. The aircraft reached Lisbon on schedule, but had experienced problems during the flight with the compass and the cabin heating system. Star Tiger arrived at Santa Maria in Azores later the same day, and as bad weather was forecast, Captain McMillan decided to remain in Santa Maria overnight and attempt the flight to Bermuda on the following day. The next day, Star Tiger departed without incident, and for the next 12 hours, Star Tiger exchanged information with another plane, the Lancastrian. They discussed weather, winds, and broadcast regular updates upon their estimated positions. It was during the 3 AM position report that Star Tiger stated that winds had blown them slightly off course, and they would arrive in Bermuda at approximately 5 AM. There were no reports of weather concerns or technical problems. At 4 minutes past 3 in the morning, Star Tiger requested a position fix from Bermuda. This was not successful, but the request was repeated at 3:15 AM. They were given a bearing of 72 degrees, and this was acknowledged at 3:17 AM. This was the last time that anyone ever heard from Star Tiger. At 10 to 4 in the morning, Star Tiger was contacted for a position update, but no reply was received. Initially the operator wasn't concerned, but when they tried to contact Star Tiger again at 11 minutes past 4 in the morning and still received no reply, an emergency was declared. The first radar-equipped B-17 search aircraft left Kindley Field at 7:15 in the morning, and for the next 5 days an extensive air and sea search was carried out, but no trace of the Star Tiger or her 6 crew or 25 passengers was ever found. Following an inquiry into the disappearance, it was found that Star Tiger made no distress calls. There were no known faults to the aircraft, the weather was good, and the plane was fully fueled. In other words, there was absolutely no reason for the plane to crash, and no wreckage has ever been found. It simply disappeared. This was reflected in the report on the plane's disappearance, which concluded, "What happened in this case will never be known, and the fate of Star Tiger must remain an unsolved mystery." Almost exactly 1 year later, another plane, Star Ariel, would disappear without trace in the Bermuda Triangle. On the 17th of January 1949, At 8:41 in the morning, Star Ariel left Bermuda bound for Kingston in Jamaica. The flight was planned to take under 6 hours, and Star Ariel carried sufficient fuel for 11 hours of flight. It carried Captain John McPhee and 7 crew, in addition to 13 passengers. The weather conditions were excellent, with little wind and no cloud cover above 10,000 feet. Captain McPhee filed a flight plan that took advantage of this fine weather by flying at 18,000 feet. At 9:33 in the morning, Star Ariel sent a routine radio update to VRT, the WT radio station in Bermuda.
I departed from Kindley Field at 8:41 AM hours. My ETA at Kingston was 2:10 PM hours. I am flying in good visibility at 18,000 feet.
Less than 10 minutes later, at 9:42 in the morning, VRT received another message from Star Ariel.
I was over 30 degrees north at 9:37. I am changing frequency to MRX.
This would be the last time anyone heard from Star Ariel. Due to issues with communication in the area, it wasn't until much later, when the aircraft still hadn't landed in Kingston, that Kingston radioed Star Ariel and received no response. 2 aircraft were immediately sent to look for Star Ariel, following its planned route, but found nothing. The following day, on the 18th of January, the search area was expanded and joined by a US Navy task force, which included 3 aircraft carriers. The search continued for 5 more days until it was called off. Just as with Star Tiger, that had disappeared a year before, the weather was good. There were no known faults, it had plenty of fuel, and no wreckage, oil slicks, debris or bodies would ever be found. And just like Star Tiger, the report concluded, through lack of evidence, due to no wreckage having been found, the cause of the accident is unknown. The Bermuda Triangle was made famous by the disappearance of Flight 19, but people disappearing in the Bermuda Triangle predates the events of 1945, and these disappearances aren't limited to aircraft. In 1918, the largest ship in the US Navy, the USS Cyclops, disappeared without trace. To this day, the mystery remains unsolved. The Cyclops was nearly 550 feet long, with a crew of 306 people, and had been sailing for 8 years without incident. But in March 1918, that would all change. The ship was transporting a cargo of dense manganese ore, setting from Brazil to Barbados. She left Brazil loaded with the brittle metal, then voyaged to Barbados to resupply for the long journey home to Baltimore. The last known message from the ship simply said, "Weather fair, all well." But on the 9-day journey, something went awry, and no one from the ship was ever seen or heard from again. The strangeness of the disappearance was best summed up by Santa Fe magazine. Usually a wooden bucket or a cork life preserver identified as belonging to a lost ship is picked up after a wreck, but not so with the Cyclops. She just disappeared, as though some gigantic monster of the sea had grabbed her, men and all. In its official statement about the Cyclops, the US Navy states the disappearance of this ship has been one of the most baffling mysteries in the annals of the Navy. One of the most perplexing events in the Bermuda Triangle occurred on the 22nd of December, 1967, when a cabin cruiser named Witchcraft disappeared without trace, only 1 mile from the shore. It was a clear evening, and hotelier Dan Burak, along with Father Patrick Horgan, were cruising through the waterways of Miami's harbour in his 23-foot cabin cruiser Witchcraft to enjoy Miami's Christmas lights from offshore. A mile into the trip, at 9 p.m, Burak called the Coast Guard, explaining that he'd hit something, and that while there was no significant damage, he would need a tow back into the marina. The lack of urgency was reflected in the relaxed and steady tone of his voice. Nonetheless, the Coast Guard was immediately dispatched, and they reached the yacht's location in less than 20 minutes. But when they arrived at the area indicating the ship's location, it was completely deserted. There was no sign of either men or the vessel. The most unusual aspect of the story is not that the cruiser had completely disappeared with both men in less than 20 minutes, but that the yacht was fitted with built-in flotation. This meant that no matter how flooded the vessel was, some part of the hull would remain above the water. So even if the damage was more severe than Burak had thought when calling the Coast Guard, the vessel should still have been easy to locate. Over the next few days, the Coast Guard officials searched hundreds of square miles of the ocean, but found nothing, and no trace of the ship or either man has been found to this day. Not everyone who's encountered strangeness in the Bermuda Triangle have disappeared. There are occasional accounts of individuals who have encountered strange events and lived to tell the tale. So here is a bonus story about someone who survived one of the most terrifying and inexplicable events ever recorded in the Bermuda Triangle. Captain Don Henry was on the 3rd day of towing a cargo barge from Puerto Rico to Fort Lauderdale, using his 50-meter tugboat by the name of Good News. The journey had been uneventful, and he had no reason to expect today to be any different. So he was surprised to hear a panicked cry from one of his officers asking him to come to the control room. Before he had a chance to ask what the problem was, the electrical dials and equipment in the control room flickered and died. It was like the ship's power was being drained by something, and the compass was spinning wildly. In over 20 years of captaining tugboats, he'd never seen anything like this before. It wasn't the weather. The sea had been flat and calm. Visibility had been good. It was somewhat cloudy, but the clouds were high up. He instinctively sensed something strange was going on. His first thoughts were to check on the status of the cargo barge they were pulling, but when he looked outside, he froze in disbelief at what he saw. The sky, once clear but for a few clouds, had merged with the sea in a milky, yellow haze. There was no horizon now, just an indistinct blend of milk and yellow. He looked down on the ocean, and all he saw was a milky foam. The cargo barge was nearly completely obscured by the fog, and he noticed that where the fog touched the surface of the ocean, the water was choppy and rough. As Captain Henry stared at the preternatural wall of fog, he felt like it was acting with intent, that somehow the fog was holding the barge and trying to pull his ship back towards it. He ordered they set the engine to full power. The engines roared, but the boat refused to move. When he looked back, he saw why. The thick, glowing, milky fog was now completely covering the cargo barge, almost hiding it from view. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle flashed through his mind, and he knew he wasn't the only one. Were they about to become another unexplained disappearance in the infamous triangle? The engines groaned, and the boat creaked under the strain. Then with one final mighty effort, it lurched forwards. Behind them, the cargo barge slipped from the grasp of the fog, and they were able to continue on their way. Captain Don Henry noted that the crew were unusually quiet for the remainder of the voyage. All of them in an unspoken agreement that they had encountered something unexplainable and were lucky to be alive. So how do we explain the strange events of the Bermuda Triangle? There have been countless theories put forward, from human error, strange electromagnetic events, rogue waves, vortices and wormholes, to alien abduction. But no single theory explains everything. And until more evidence is uncovered, the forces behind the most mysterious disappearances within the Bermuda Triangle are likely to remain unexplained. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like, share and subscribe. It makes such a difference to small channels like these. We upload twice a week, so that way you won't miss any future episodes. And if you made it this far, thank you very much for listening.